I have to read you guys this article. I'm just perusing the Jerusalem Post. I'm trying to find some stuff that I can share. I got to share this one. This is ridiculous. I can't even believe this is something that's real. Israeli scientist figures out how to stop cows from killing the planet. As I read this, you'll start to remember where all this come from. Genetically modifying cows may help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and feed world populations, a new study led by Professor Itzhak Mizrahi of Ben Gurion University of the Negev suggests. Now, you remember how we've had this constant issue with genetically modified produce and the issues that it causes. Now we're seeing health issues coming from this. Our findings are both a major breakthrough for basic science and will have a positive impact on two major challenges facing the international community for the foreseeable future: climate change and food security, Mizrahi said. Mizrahi and R.J. Wallace, professor emeritus at University of Aberdeen in Scotland, led a group of 31 scientists in investigating the microbiomes of lactating dairy cows and the genes that are responsible for them. Microbiomes, it's cow farts. Studies have shown that dairy cows contribute large amounts of greenhouse gas emissions caused by the organisms living in their microbiomes, according to a 2013 assessment by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Surprise, the United Nations is involved. Dairy cows added 2,128 million metric tons of CO2 to the atmosphere in 1 year. The Israeli findings indicate that specific microbes in a cow's rumens or stomachs determines the amount of methane that cows emit. Within cow stomachs is a diverse colony of Archaea, ciliate protozoa, bacteria, and anaerobic fungi. The researchers conducted experiments on 1,016 cows, 816 Holstein dairy cows, and 200 Nordic red dairy cows across Italy, Finland, Sweden, and the United States. I don't know how they could get the numbers they got based on 1,016 cows. We have ranchers in Texas that have more cows than that. As milk consumption goes up and the number of cows increases along with it, Mizrahi thought that it was important for scientists to look into the rumens of cows to figure out how to mitigate the effects of the cow population on the environment. He emphasized that his role was not because he has an opinion as to whether or not the cow population should increase, but that as a scientist he hoped to perform a good service to the public. Some scientists, to me, he just ruined his credibility as a scientist. Whatever. Some scientists and public figures have suggested solutions, such as feeding cows grass or cutting back on the amount of meat that human populations consume. However, Mizrahi said he simply started with the facts on the ground. The number of cows keeps increasing, and something needs to be done about the negative impact they are having on the environment. The idea here is not to take an opinion on growing more cows. It's just reducing the impact, the global impact or the negative impact, by using this finding. Decreasing the amount of methane emissions from cows would have a benefit aside from the environmental result he found. Feeding world populations. He and his team found that the cows that release less methane also produce more milk in what he called a win-win. Methane basically encompasses energy within it, he said. Now, when they release it into the atmosphere, the energy is not getting into the cow where it can be used to, for example, produce more milk. You basically lose energy that would go towards milk production. Now, hold on. What he's saying here is what I'm hearing, what he's saying, that when they fart, they're losing the energy that they use to produce milk. I have never heard anywhere where methane produced from the gut is used to produce milk. That is a biological process within the cow's body. I don't know. Producing more milk could solve some of the hunger that could arise from increasing world populations, according to Mizrahi. Even now, the planet is operating at maximum output for meat and dairy products, and that problem is only going to get worse in the coming decades. By 2050, the world, he's making a prediction. By 2050, the world will have approximately 9 billion people, he said. That's going to mean a serious crisis in protein nutrition. Mizrahi said that with his findings, it would be possible to selectively breed cows, preferencing those whose rumen microbiomes produce less methane, With adequate support on a public policy level, he predicted that a breeding program could replace the majority of dairy cows in the space of 5 to 10 years. In future research projects, he hopes to delve deeper into the rumen microbiome and to learn to genetically engineer them. By studying the rules that govern how microbiomes are being assembled, Mizrahi hopes to learn more about microbiome functions and ecosystems, explaining that the fundamental questions are, how do we govern the effect of microbiomes? Now, there's an important point I want to check out, and I want you guys to go with me while I check it out. Where is it? Ah, oh, come on. Stupid phone. Okay. Okay, there it is. That number. Dairy cows added 2,128 million metric tons of CO2 to the atmosphere in 1 year. Some of y'all may already know where I'm going with this. Stay with me just 1 second here. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, or USBS as they've become more commonly known, the world's volcanoes, both on land and undersea, generate about 200 million tons of carbon dioxide, CO2, annually, while our automotive and industrial activities cause some 24 billion tons of CO2 emissions every year worldwide. It's interesting to note they didn't say whether that was collectively volcanoes or if that was individually. Let's dig a little deeper into this. We want to prove the facts, right? Okay, let's see what this guy has to say here. A single volcanic plume lasting only hours, one single belch from a volcano, might add many millions of tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Now, this goes a story I told months and months, way back at the beginning of the year, about when they were trying to. This was back in the late 80s, early 90s, and there was a group of people that were trying to push for the CO2 thing, get rid of styrofoam cups, cutting vehicles. Everybody's got to go to electric. And at the time this was going on and it was being pushed through the courts, there was a group of researchers at a volcano, and that volcano just popped off and blew a bunch of junk in the air. Didn't erupt, just big old belch. The information they recorded, they took to those courts, and they said, look, this volcano in one day, in one single eruption of junk, put out more CO2 than all the cars in the world will put out in the next 100 years. This is interesting to note. I want to dig deeper into this and see what we come up with. Let's see what they say. They already said in one belch, millions of tons can be put in there. I'm trying to find more specific numbers. Okay. So for billions of years, geological processes like volcanic eruptions controlled the carbon concentration in the atmosphere, as volcanism is a major way that carbon rises from the mantle into the atmosphere. Interesting note that trees need this to produce oxygen. Most of the carbon stored in the mantle is in the form of carbonate, a salt of carbonic acid. But there are also huge stores of actual carbon dioxide sequestered deep within the mantle as a dissolved gas within a liquid rock. Recent research about carbon reserves discovered underneath the United States has led to a new estimate of the amount of carbon in the Earth's upper mantle, approximately 100 trillion tons. By contrast, there are only about 3.2 trillion tons of CO2, containing about 870 billion tons of actual carbon in the atmosphere today. So we have almost twice as much CO2 under the crust as we do in the atmosphere. But look at what's already in the atmosphere. 870 billion tons are in the atmosphere already. Um, yes, we've actually measured and estimated the amount of carbon dioxide that humans have been adding to the atmosphere through our burning of fossil fuels, but it's vital to know what the natural rate of CO2 emission is to understand the impact humans are having. Humans emit around 29 billion tons of CO2 each year. Do you remember what the number was for the cows? A little less than 1% of present atmospheric CO2. We tend to think of erupting volcanoes with active smoking plumes as the biggest source of carbon dioxide, and Mount Etna is not only a classic example, it's one of the most reliable volcanoes of all. If anyone ever bet you which major volcano do you think might erupt this year, bet on Mount Etna. So you see right off the bat, we see 29 billion tons of CO2 each year from humans. And that's only 1%. And what was it for the cows? Let's go back and take a look real quick. For the cows, this organization, based ironically United Nations organization, dairy cows added 2,128 million metric tons of CO2 to the atmosphere each year. Right off the bat, when we go dig into the numbers, we find humans put more CO2 than cows do. So why are they trying to stop cow farts? What sense does this make? Well, it doesn't. But that's funny that cows put even less than 1%. Context, context, context. We can measure the degassing of Mount Etna extremely well and find, now this is one volcano, and find that it adds about 16,000 tons of CO2 to the atmosphere each day, or 5.8 million tons per year. This is one volcano. We've already exceeded the yearly count, exceeded what humans and cows together put out. This blows that out of the water. Definitely blows the cows out. This might not sound impressive, but it's only one volcano. Interestingly, it's not just smoking, actively erupting volcanoes that emit CO2, but seemingly inactive volcanoes around arcs and rift zones. Persistent degassing still occurs around a great number of volcanoes worldwide on a continuous basis. Yellowstone, considered an inactive volcano, is degassing an incredible amount of CO2 and helium-3 right now. A tremendous synthesis of information took place in 2013, revealing our best value yet for the total amount of CO2 emitted from natural release events within Earth. They found 33 measured degassing volcanoes emit a total of 60 million tons of CO2 per year. That's 33 volcanoes. We have a whole lot more. There are a total of 150 known degassing volcanoes, implying, based on the measured ones, that a total of 271 million tons of CO2 are released annually. That's without erupting. That's just doing their normal thing. 30 historically active volcanoes are measured to emit a total of 6.4 million tons of CO2 per year. With 550 historically active volcanoes total, 550, they extrapolate this class of object contributes 117 million tons of CO2 per year. That's not counting them erupting. That's counting all of them doing what they're doing right currently. The global total from volcanic lakes is 94 million tons of CO2 per year. That's another aspect. A lot of volcanoes have lakes in them. Additional emissions from tectonic, hydrothermal, and inactive volcanic areas contribute an estimated 66 million tons of CO2 per year, although the total number of emitting tectonic areas are unknown. And finally, emissions from mid-ocean ridges are estimated to be 97 million tons of CO2 annually. We see just from those numbers and those few things that put this off, we're not counting all this other stuff, that it completely blows these stupid numbers they have out of the water. Why would cow farts be such a horrible event to affect the climate when the Earth does it on its own? Add all of these up, you get an estimate of around 645 million tons of CO2 per year. Yes, there are uncertainties. Yes, there's annual variation. Yes, it's easy to get led astray if you think that Mount Etna is typical rather than the usual large emitter of CO2 that it is. When you realize that volcanism contributes 645 million tons of CO2 per year, and it becomes clearer if you write it as 0.645 billion tons of CO2 per year. Compared to humanity's 25 billion tons per year, it's overwhelmingly clear what's caused the carbon dioxide increase in Earth's atmosphere since 1750. These numbers right here, where they broke this down, show volcanoes, the Earth itself, puts out more CO2 than we do. The Earth itself puts out more CO2 than the cows do. Why are they so vehemently wanting to put filters in cows' buttholes to stop them from farting? Basically, that's what they're saying they're going to do. Not literally, but basically, that's what they're saying. They want to make it so they don't produce methane. They're using this as a launching pad for a doctrine saying that the Earth is being affected. Remember when all the people were talking about, oh, if the ice cap melts, whole Earth's going to flood. We're going to have a water world. Did you know that they found over 300 rivers coming out of Antarctica from under the ice, dumping millions of gallons of fresh water into the ocean every single day? That's the thing melting, and it's not affecting the water. The water hasn't come up. You ever want to do a really cool experiment? Figure out what the area of all the water that covers the Earth, what the area is. Now figure out, take a glass of water, and the top, figure out what that area is in the top of that glass. Make a line on that glass, take an ice cube and drop it in there, and then make another line and measure. You can take a micrometer and measure that measurement. It's just going to be a tiny bit. Now figure in that glass of water what the area is for the ice cube compared, all of the ice cube compared to that area on the surface of that water. Apply that to your measurement you got and it raised it. Now go back to the Earth's measurement of all the water that covers the Earth. And imagine that like a glass of water. And imagine and do your math. I don't know what the math is, calculus, but figure what area, what size amount of piece of ice it would take to put in there to raise it up an equal amount mathematically to what it raised up in that glass. You're going to find that most of the Earth will have to be covered with ice in order for that to happen. What the ice we contain on the Earth right now is not enough to affect our oceans in any appreciable negative fashion. If it all melted all at one time, of course we're going to have weather changes. You're now introducing a bunch of solid water into the atmosphere because it's going to evaporate. The Earth is designed to handle this stuff. And God is in control of all this. Do you think He will let mankind die out over cow farts? No, He will not. He designed them to fart. Got to get rid of the gas somehow. It's part of the process. We fart. So what does all this mean? And why am I getting all fired up about this? The numbers that these people put out, the numbers they invent are wrong. They always pad these numbers to the positive as far as they can get away with to prove their case and to push or force their agenda on other people. Ocasio-Cortez does not know what she's talking about. This world will not be destroyed in 12 years. Unless the tribulation happens, and that's a different story. It will not be destroyed and mankind will not be wiped out in 12 years. If that was the case, this earth would be in such deep trouble now, there wouldn't be many humans living on it. And then now, I can see it then. But we don't have those problems. Going by ecology, our planet is doing well. It's processing fine. Everything is going according to whatever it's been going to forever. We put more pollution in the air back in the 18 and 1700s because everybody burned coal and wood back then for heat than what we do now by a long shot. Why now all of a sudden is everybody worried about it? They put so much pollution in the air back in those days in almost every country, it blocked out the sun during the daytime. Like to the point that people thought it was night. And it wasn't. It was just there was so much smoke in the air. You got to take it all in context. This is going to be my theme for the day. Context. You got to know what you're talking about. You got to take all the numbers into account. You can't just say, yep, that sounds right. Yep, cow farts is the problem. That's what's destroying our planet. No, deforestation is having a bigger effect than that is. Cutting down all the trees and all we need them. They make oxygen. They take all this CO2 and process it into oxygen. Go look it up. It's basic grade school science. Photosynthesis. They take sunlight, helps them convert CO2 into oxygen. That's why they say if you want your house to be cleaner, have a bunch of green plants in there. They produce oxygen. And you'll feel better. These numbers drive me crazy. These people come up with these silly things. Me being a regular guy sitting in a living room in the middle of South Texas can look at these numbers and can extrapolate a much clearer understanding than some of these other idiots who are holding high offices getting paid 7 figures every year. Give me the $1 million a year. I can sit here and just use regular old common everyday common sense and come up with a better plan than you guys got. Silliness. Absolute ridiculous silliness. And that was just two aspects that I gave you. And that was just recording on these numbers of the volcanic activity on the Earth. You also have to take into account bird farts, leopard farts, lion farts, fish farts. How many animal species can I go through? What about all their farts? They fart too. Nobody's ever done a study on that. What if all the animals farted at a pre-described rate? How much would all those other species versus cows be putting into the atmosphere? See where I'm going with this? You can't just take one number into account. You got to take all the numbers into account. Everything puts off CO2. That's just the way it is. We exhale it and we exhale it. We have two different orifices that exhale CO2. Our cars do it. Our machinery does it. Our factories do it. Everything does it. The Earth was designed to absorb that. It has checks and balances in place to affect those things. And besides that fact, God is on his throne and in control, and he wouldn't let that happen. So what do we do with this information? Well, first of all, we tell the idiots putting this stuff out that they don't know what they're talking about. Look at these numbers. Volcanism alone wipes those numbers off the face of the Earth. Completely obliterates cow farts. Done. Don't be deceived by what these silly people put out. Do your research. Go and test what they say and dig into the details and look for that stuff. I did one simple Google search and found better information than what they were putting out because they weren't putting out any details. Don't believe reporters. Don't believe news stories. If they give you numbers, go look up those numbers. Dig deeper into that. Because the CO2 put out naturally by the Earth and by all the other species that exist on the Earth is far above and beyond anything cows or humans are going to put out. We are just one piece of the puzzle, one aspect of how this planet works and everything that goes on this planet. To think that we would have such a negative impact on that, to me, is arrogance of the greatest degree. How could we think that we would affect the planet that much? When the planet obviously takes care of itself, obviously does a good job dealing with all these issues. It has its own checks and balances that balance everything out. It was designed that way. Silliness. So yeah, if you got cows and they're farting, you better do something about it. You better go get you some filters to strap to them. Filter all that methane gas because you're helping to destroy the planet. Anyway, silliness. Context, context, context. You have to understand where this is all coming from. It's a Luciferian agenda. They're pushing an agenda to control people. They want to control what you eat and drink. They want to control what you do. That's just one facet of that ugly, nasty piece of coal that they're trying to put on everybody else. Silly. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video.